The sun was
Cowboy
setting over
married
the
his
dusty
wife in
plains of West
1939.
Texas, painting the
Every
sky
night
in
for
shades of
45 years,
orange
he talked to her
and purple
grave.
that seemed almost too
She
beautiful
died
to
in
be
his
real.
arms
An
in
old cowboy named William Bill
1939.
McKenna sat on the weathered
He
porch of
kept
his small
one-
cabin, watching the colors fade into darkness, just as his own life was slowly fading away. He was 73 years old, and the doctor in town had told him last week that he had maybe a month left, maybe less. His heart was giving out, worn down by decades of hard living, heartbreak, and loneliness that cut deeper than any wound he had ever received. Bill reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph so old and faded that most people would not be able to make out the image anymore. But Bill did not need to see it clearly, because he had memorized every detail of that picture over the past 45 years. It showed a young woman with dark hair and bright eyes standing in front of a church in her wedding dress. Her name was Eleanor, and she had been the love of his life, the one person who had made him believe that maybe a rough cowboy like himself could find happiness in this cruel world. They had met in the spring of 1934, when Bill was just 28 years old, working as a ranch hand on a large cattle operation outside of Amarillo. Eleanor had come to visit her uncle, who owned the neighboring property, and Bill had spotted her walking along the fence line one morning while he was out checking on the herd. She had gotten her dress caught on the barbed wire, and Bill had climbed down from his horse to help her get free. When their eyes met for the first time, Bill felt something shift inside his chest, something he had never felt before and would never feel again with any other person for the rest of his long and lonely life. They courted for 2 years, which was considered a long time back in those days. But Bill wanted to save up enough money to buy a small piece of land where they could build a life together. Eleanor waited patiently, never once complaining, never once doubting that Bill would keep his promise to marry her. She had faith in him when nobody else did, including Bill himself. On June 15th, 1936, they were married in the small white church in town, and Bill could still remember the way Eleanor looked, walking down that aisle like it had happened yesterday, instead of nearly half a century ago. They had 3 wonderful years together, 3 years that Bill would trade everything he had ever owned or ever would own just to live through one more time. Eleanor got pregnant in the winter of 1938, and Bill was so happy that he could not stop smiling for weeks. He would lie in bed at night with his hand on her growing belly, feeling their child kick and move, making plans for all the things he would teach his son or daughter. He was going to be a good father, a better father than his own had been. He was going to be there for every moment, every first step, every scraped knee, every bedtime story. But life had other plans for Bill McKenna, cruel and heartless plans that would destroy everything he loved and leave him broken for the rest of his days. In the spring of 1939, Eleanor went into labor 3 weeks early. Bill rode through the night to fetch the doctor from town, pushing his horse harder than he had ever pushed any animal in his life. But when he got back to the cabin with the doctor, it was already too late. Eleanor had lost too much blood, and the baby, a little girl they had planned to name Sarah, after Eleanor's mother, had been born without breath in her tiny body. Bill held Eleanor's hand as she slipped away from him, watching the light fade from those beautiful eyes that had looked at him with so much love for 3 perfect years. Her last words to him were simple, but they would haunt him forever. She said, "Don't be lonely, Bill. Promise me you won't be lonely." And Bill had promised me you won't be lonely, even though he knew in that moment that he would never be able to keep that promise, that loneliness would be his constant companion from that day forward until the day he died. He buried Eleanor and baby Sarah on a small hill behind their cabin under an old oak tree where they used to sit together and watch the sunset. Bill carved the headstone himself, working through his tears until his hands were raw and bleeding. For months after, he could not eat, could not sleep, could not do anything but sit by those graves and talk to his wife and daughter as if they could still hear him. The other cowboys in the area started calling him Ghost Bill because he wandered around like a spirit himself, more dead than alive, just going through the motions of existing without really living at all. Years passed, and Bill never remarried. He never even looked at another woman. Some folks in town tried to set him up with widows or spinsters, thinking they were doing him a kindness, but Bill always politely refused. How could he love anyone else when his heart was buried on that hill under the oak tree? How could he start a new life when his real life had ended on that terrible night in 1939? He threw himself into work instead, taking any job that would keep him busy and exhausted enough to sleep without dreaming of Eleanor's face. He worked cattle drives that took him from Texas to Montana and back again. He broke wild horses that nobody else would dare to approach. He fought in bar brawls and survived stampedes, and once even got shot by a cattle rustler, taking a bullet in the shoulder that still ached every time it rained. Through it all, he kept Eleanor's photograph in his pocket, right over his heart, and every night before he fell asleep, he would look at her face and whisper, "I'm sorry, Ellie. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry I've been so lonely." Now, sitting on his porch watching the sunset, Bill knew that his time was finally coming to an end. Part of him was relieved, if he was being honest with himself. 45 years was a long time to carry the weight of grief and loneliness. 45 years was a long time to wake up every morning reaching for someone who was not there, to set two places at the table out of habit, and then remember that you only needed one, to hear a woman laugh in town and feel your heart leap for just a second before reality came crashing back down. But there was something Bill needed to do before he could let go and join Eleanor on the other side. He had made a decision last night, lying awake in bed and listening to his heart struggle to keep beating. He was going to take one last ride out to the old homestead where he and Eleanor had first lived together, where their daughter was buried alongside her mother. He had not been back there in over 20 years, not since he sold the land to a young couple from back east who wanted to try their hand at ranching. But he needed to see those graves one more time. He needed to say goodbye properly. The next morning, Bill woke up before dawn and saddled his old horse, a gray mare named Dusty, who had been with him for 15 years. Dusty was getting old too, her steps slower than they used to be, her eyes a little cloudy with cataracts. But she was still strong enough for one more journey, just like Bill was. They had always understood each other, Bill and Dusty. They were both survivors, both too stubborn to quit, even when quit in would have been the easier path. The ride to the old homestead took most of the day. Bill had to stop several times to rest, his chest tight and his breath coming in short gasps that worried him. But he refused to turn back. He had made a promise to himself, and Bill McKenna had never broken a promise in his life, except for the one he made to Eleanor about not being lonely. That was the only promise he had ever failed to keep, and the guilt of that failure had eaten at him for decades. When he finally crested the hill and saw the old cabin in the distance, Bill felt tears streaming down his weathered face. The cabin was still standing, though it looked different now. The new owners had added a second floor and painted it white instead of the natural wood that Bill remembered. There was a windmill that had not been there before, and a red barn that was much bigger than the old one Bill had built with his own hands. But the oak tree on the hill was still there, its branches spreading wide like arms, reaching up to heaven. Bill rode Dusty slowly toward the hill, hoping the owners would not mind an old cowboy passing through their land. As he got closer, he saw that the graves were still there, still marked by the headstone he had carved all those years ago. Someone had been taking care of them, keeping the weeds cleared and placing fresh flowers by the stone. Bill's heart swelled with gratitude toward these strangers who had shown such kindness to his family's memory. He climbed down from Dusty's back, his old bones protesting every movement, and walked the last few steps to the graves on foot. When he reached the headstone, he fell to his knees in the grass and wept like he had not wept since the night Eleanor died. All the years of holding everything inside, of being the strong, silent cowboy who never showed his feelings, came pouring out of him in great heaving, sobs that shook his entire body. "I'm here, Ellie," he whispered when he could finally speak again. "I'm here, and I'm so tired. I've been so lonely without you, just like you knew I would be. I tried to keep my promise, I really did. I tried to find happiness, tried to make friends, tried to live the kind of life you would have wanted for me. But nothing ever felt right without you by my side. Nothing ever felt like home." Bill reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph, holding it up so he could see Eleanor's face one more time. The evening sun was starting to set behind him, casting long shadows across the hillside and turning everything golden and warm. It was beautiful, so beautiful, that it almost hurt to look at. Eleanor would have loved this sunset. She always said that West Texas had the most beautiful sunsets in the whole world. "I'm coming home soon, Ellie," Bill said, his voice steady, now despite the tears still rolling down his cheeks. "The doctor says my heart is giving out, and I reckon he's right, because I can feel it, struggling every time I take a breath. But I'm not scared. I'm not scared because I know you're waiting for me somewhere on the other side. You and little Sarah, the daughter I never got to hold, the daughter I never got to watch grow up. We're going to be a family again, just like we were always supposed to be." Bill stayed by the graves until the sun had fully set, and the stars started appearing one by one in the darkening sky. He told Eleanor about all the years she had missed, all the adventures he had been on, all the people he had met along the way. He told her about the time he saved a young boy from drowning in a river during a cattle drive, and how that boy had grown up to become a preacher who still sent Bill Christmas cards every year. He told her about the wild horse he had named Spirit, who had become the best cut ting horse anyone had ever seen. He told her about the friends he had made and lost, the good times and the bad, the moments of joy that had been too few, and the moments of sorrow that had been too many. When he finally ran out of words, Bill kissed the photograph one last time and placed it on the grave, tucking it under a small stone so the wind would not carry it away. "I'm leaving this here with you," he said. "I don't need it anymore because I'm going to see the real you soon enough. Keep it safe for me until I get there." The ride back home was harder than the ride out had been. Bill's chest was aching fiercely now, and he had to hold on to Dusty's mane just to stay in the saddle. But the old mare seemed to sense that something was wrong, because she walked carefully and steadily, never making any sudden movements that might throw her rider off balance. When they finally reached the cabin, Bill barely had enough strength to unsaddle her and make sure she had food and water for the night. He stumbled inside and collapsed onto his bed, still wearing his boots, and his dusty trail clothes. He was too tired to change, too tired to eat, too tired to do anything but lie there and stare at the ceiling while his heart beat slower and slower in his chest. But for the first time in 45 years, Bill McKenna did not feel lonely. He felt at peace. In his mind, he could see Eleanor waiting for him at the end of a long dirt road, wearing that same white dress she had worn on their wedding day. She was holding a baby in her arms, a little girl with dark hair. Like her mother and Bill's strong chin, they were smiling at him, beckoning him forward, welcoming him home. After his long and lonely journey through life, Bill closed his eyes and took one last breath, letting go of everything that had been holding him to this world. The pain in his chest faded away, replaced by a warmth and lightness that he had not felt since he was a young man in love with a beautiful woman who saw something good in him that nobody else could see. When the neighbors found Bill 3 days later, he was lying peacefully in his bed with a smile on his face. Nobody could explain that smile, but if they had known the story of Bill McKenna and his Eleanor, they would have understood. After 45 years of loneliness, the old cowboy had finally found his way home. He had taken his last ride, not into the sunset, but into the arms of the family he had lost so long ago. And somewhere, on a small hill, under an old oak tree in West Texas, 2 spirits were reunited at last, their love story finally complete.